Have you ever noticed something strange? You pick up your phone, you start scrolling for 20 minutes or so, then you put it down and feel absolutely nothing at all. No joy, no pleasure. Just a weird kind of emptiness. Or you open a marketplace just to take a quick look. Nothing serious. But an hour later, your cart already has a few things you don't actually need. Or why do people sit down to play at a casino just one last time? And then keep playing even when they clearly understand they should stop. All of these situations are connected by the same hidden mechanism. Its name is dopamine. Today we're going to break down why this neurotransmitter can be both your best friend and your most dangerous enemy at the same time. And most importantly, how to use it in a way that makes it work for you, instead of quietly working against you. Let's start with the biggest myth. Many people believe that dopamine is the hormone of pleasure. You eat a delicious pizza, your brain releases dopamine, and you feel good. Sounds simple. But in reality, it's a bit more complicated than that. Dopamine is not so much about pleasure itself, but about motivation and the expectation of a reward. Neuroscientist Kent Barrett showed that the reward system actually includes two separate processes, wanting and liking. And dopamine is mainly responsible for the wanting part, the drive to go after something. When your brain senses that something pleasant might be coming, dopamine creates anticipation and pushes you to act. It kind of nudges you forward. That's why it's so easy to keep scrolling, to check for notifications, to wait for a package, or to look forward to a vacation. Sometimes, the anticipation can feel even stronger, even more exciting than the reward itself. But there's an important detail here. Dopamine also reacts to unexpected rewards. If something good happens out of nowhere, the signal still appears. Neuroscientists call this a reward prediction error. Your brain is constantly comparing what it expected with what it actually received, and dopamine signals the gap between the two. In simple terms, dopamine doesn't just make you feel good. It makes things feel important, desirable, and worth chasing, and it keeps pushing you to come back for more. This was clearly demonstrated in the experiments of neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz. He conducted studies with monkeys. At first, the animals were given a signal, and then a second later they received juice. In the beginning, dopamine was released at the moment they got the juice, but over time the monkeys learned the pattern, and the dopamine started to spike at the moment of the signal itself, even before the juice appeared. The anticipation itself became the reward, and when the signal appeared but the juice didn't follow, dopamine levels dropped sharply. The brain was essentially punishing the broken expectation. Remember this idea. It explains a huge number of our everyday habits. Now let's look at a simple pattern. At first, a trigger appears. Something catches your attention and pulls you in. Then comes anticipation. Your brain starts to think that there might be something interesting, something rewarding waiting for you. After that, you take action. You tap a button, open an app, refresh the page, or start scrolling the screen. And finally, there is a result. You either get a reward, or you feel a bit of disappointment. But there's an important detail here. Unpredictable rewards create a much stronger reaction in the brain than predictable ones. They keep the system engaged. This principle is called variable reinforcement. If you know for sure that you'll get a piece of candy every single time, the excitement quickly fades and the behavior becomes boring. But if the reward appears only sometimes, randomly, it becomes much harder to stop, because your brain keeps hoping this time will be the one. This is exactly how slot machines are designed, and it's also how social media feeds are built, with endless scrolling and occasional hits of something interesting. That's why we keep checking our phones again and again, even when we don't really need to. When you scroll through your feed, you're not looking for something specific. You're just looking for something interesting. Maybe the next post will be funny. Maybe it will be important. Or maybe it will be something you'll want to send to your friends. Each swipe is like pulling the lever on a slot machine. Most posts don't trigger much of a reaction. But every now and then, something really interesting shows up. And your brain remembers this pattern. Keep scrolling, there might be something good coming next. Likes and notifications work the same way. You post something and then start waiting for a reaction. Every new notification becomes a small reward signal. A tiny hit that keeps you coming back. Studies show that the average person checks their phone around 90 times a day. And most of the time, it's not because of an important message. It's just a thought that pops up. What if there's something there? There's another interesting effect when it comes to impulse buying. The act of buying often brings more emotion than the item itself. You see something new, you add it to your cart, you start imagining how you'll use it, how it will fit into your life. At that moment, your brain gets a hit of dopamine. But when the purchase actually arrives, the emotions are already much weaker. It just doesn't feel the same anymore. This is called hedonic adaptation. The brain quickly gets used to something new and starts looking for the next target. Marketers understand this very well. That's why you see discount timers, messages like only a few items left, and options like buy now, pay later. All of this amplifies the feeling of anticipation and urgency. An impulse purchase is often not about the actual need. It's about buying the anticipation itself, not the thing. The clearest example of a dopamine trap is gambling. Why do people keep playing even after heavy losses, even when they know they should stop? Logic says stop, but the brain works differently. What if the next round is the winning one? Just one more try. Dopamine is not mainly released at the moment of winning. It is released during anticipation, during uncertainty itself, when the roulette ball is still spinning, when the slot machine reels are still turning. That maybe moment is where the strongest response happens. There is also the near-miss effect. When you get 2 matching symbols out of 3, the brain reacts almost like you won, even though it's still a loss. This is what makes gambling so hard to stop once you start. Video games are probably the most honest example of all. Developers don't even hide the fact that they are literally designing dopamine loops. Take almost any popular game and you will see the same core elements repeating everywhere. Progression and levels, the basics. A leveling system creates a constant feeling that you are always close to your goal. You keep seeing the experience bar, and you always know exactly how much is left until the next stage. The brain loves this feeling of clarity and completion. It keeps you engaged. When you finally reach a level, there is a short dopamine spike, a quick sense of achievement. But it doesn't last. It is immediately replaced by a new objective, a new quest, a new target, and so it turns into an endless staircase where every step gives a small reward, increases motivation, but never leads to final satisfaction. And of course, loot boxes and chests. These mechanics work on the same principle we talked about earlier. Loot boxes are basically slot machines inside a video game. Since you never know in advance whether you'll get a powerful item or completely useless junk, dopamine spikes heavily at the moment of opening the chest. The uncertainty itself is the reward. In many countries, such as Belgium and the Netherlands, these systems have already been legally recognized as a form of gambling. Then there are daily quests and login bonuses. These mechanics build habits at a reflex level. You are told, log in today and get a reward. This is not really about caring for your enjoyment. It's a hook designed to keep you inside the game ecosystem. Your brain starts to treat missing a single day as a loss, which creates discomfort and pulls you back again and again. By the way, an important concept here is the gap between wanting and liking. Research has shown that there are 2 separate systems in the brain. One is responsible for desire, motivation, and seeking, and the other is responsible for actual pleasure and satisfaction. Dopamine mainly controls the wanting system, not the liking one. During long gaming sessions, players often admit that they are no longer really enjoying the game. And I think many people can relate to this. It becomes boring, you feel tired, even a bit empty, but you still can't press the exit button, you keep going anyway. This happens because the wanting system keeps pushing you toward the next reward, the next level, the next small achievement, while the pleasure system is already shut down or significantly weakened. So you end up in a strange state. You don't really want to play anymore in a meaningful sense, but your brain still demands continuation because it is chasing the next anticipated reward. You become trapped in a process that no longer brings real joy, only the urge to keep going. Another area where dopamine works against us is food. Why is it so incredibly hard to resist a portion of fries or a chocolate cake, even when you know you've already had enough? The answer goes back to our distant past. Millions of years ago, calorie-dense food was extremely rare. If our ancestors found a tree with very sweet fruit, the brain would send a powerful survival signal. Eat as much as possible right now, because tomorrow there might be nothing. The problem is that today we live in a world of constant and extreme food abundance, but our brain is still operating on the same ancient system. It hasn't caught up. Modern companies take advantage of this and create what scientists call supernormal stimuli. Foods engineered with the perfect combination of sugar, fat, and salt. A combination that almost never exists in nature in this intensity. When you eat a normal apple, you get a relatively mild and stable dopamine response, but when you bite into a slice of pizza or eat something highly processed and rich, dopamine levels can spike dramatically. Over time, your sensitivity starts to shift. Regular, healthy food begins to feel bland, less exciting, even boring, and your brain starts demanding stronger and stronger stimulation just to feel the same level of satisfaction. This can slowly lead to a form of behavioral dependence around food. You don't eat because you're physically hungry. You eat because your brain is chasing another quick dopamine hit. In the 1970s, American scientist Howard Moskowitz received a request from major food corporations. The goal was to mathematically calculate the perfect amount of sugar in a product. Not too much, not too little, but exactly the point where a person feels maximum pleasure without getting tired of it too quickly. In other words, they were trying to find the exact sweet spot that makes a product feel as enjoyable as possible for the largest number of people, while also keeping them coming back for more. Then the same logic was applied to fat, to salt, and later to combinations of all three. And that's where things started to get really interesting. Each of these components works in a different way. Sugar creates a fast spike of energy and an immediate pleasure signal, raising blood glucose levels and then dropping just as quickly, which makes the brain want another hit. Fat itself has very little taste, but it acts as a flavor carrier. It dissolves aromatic compounds and helps deliver them to taste receptors. In simple terms, fatty foods are literally more flavorful on a chemical level, and they also create a richer, more satisfying texture. Salt enhances all the other flavors and suppresses bitterness, making everything taste stronger and more appealing overall. But the real trick is not each ingredient separately, but their combination. When you eat something simple, like boiled rice or an apple, satiety comes fairly quickly. The brain receives a uniform signal and says, okay, that's enough. Scientists call this sensory-specific satiety, but when the taste is complex and multi-layered, salty, fatty, slightly sour, with a crunchy texture, every sensory channel is being stimulated at the same time. Each receptor is occupied with something different. The brain doesn't get the chance to fully adapt to any single sensation. The enough signal simply doesn't arrive in time. That's why a bag of chips can disappear almost without you noticing, while nuts, which are often even more calorie-dense, can be eaten in a small handful and you naturally stop. Here's the interesting part. Calories matter, but sensory stimulation and food structure can have an even bigger impact on how much we eat. Ultra-processed foods with moderate calories can be far more engaging and addictive than simple, naturally calorie-dense foods. And that's not all. In parallel, there is an entire global flavoring industry built around this idea. The strawberry smell in a yogurt, for example, often has very little to do with real strawberries. In many cases, it's a carefully synthesized molecule designed to activate specific smell and taste receptors in the brain. Your brain receives a very clear signal. This is natural, this is delicious, even when the actual product might contain almost no real fruit at all. And this is where it becomes important, because the goal is not just taste anymore, but control of perception. To make your brain interpret something as rewarding before you even think about it consciously. In the end, you're not eating purely because you are hungry, and not even because the food is simply good in a normal, natural sense. You're eating because the food was deliberately engineered at multiple levels, taste, smell, texture, even mouthfeel, to make stopping feel harder than continuing. Okay, we've established that dopamine is a powerful mechanism that can easily be used against us, but the same system can also work in our favor, if we understand how it works. First, break big goals into small steps. When a goal is very big, the reward feels far away. The brain barely feels any motivation in the present moment. The dopamine signal is weak, so taking action becomes difficult, but a small step works differently. The reward feels closer, the brain registers progress, dopamine is released, and the urge to continue increases. That's why it's better to set small, specific tasks. Not write a book, but write 1 page today. Not lose 15 kilograms, but go to the gym on Wednesday. The brain needs small wins. That's what fuels motivation. Second, intentionally create anticipation. Remember that dopamine is strongly activated during the expectation of a reward. You can use this. Plan enjoyable things in advance. A vacation, meeting a friend, or going to the cinema. The act of planning alone already creates anticipation. Studies show that people who have something pleasant planned for the future tend to feel happier on average, even if the event hasn't happened yet. You might have heard about dopamine detox. Yes, that idea of temporarily cutting out fast stimuli whether like social media, sugar, or video games, but there is an important nuance. Dopamine does not get used up or stored like a battery. What actually happens is different. When the brain is exposed to too many strong stimuli, it becomes less sensitive to weaker ones. If you reduce social media and other fast sources of stimulation for a few days, ordinary things start to feel enjoyable again. A walk, a book, or a conversation. The threshold for what feels interesting gradually resets. Also, simply quitting a habit is very difficult. The dopamine loop does not disappear, it just starts looking for a new trigger. That's why replacement works better. When you feel like opening social media, try listening to a podcast or reading a book instead. When you feel like making an impulse purchase, add the item to a wish list and come back to it after 2 days. Very often, after 48 hours, the urge is already gone. If you found this video useful, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. See you next time.